Welcome to the Power of Offense with Keith and Rodney. And I'm your host, Big Keith. This particular video is part 3 of a series that I shall complete dealing with marriage. And I just wanted to discuss the importance of marriage. This has been a huge discussion in the black manosphere. I've been listening to this discussion over the past year. And there seems to be a divide on whether marriage makes sense for young men today. And in my opinion, it does. And primarily for young men who decide to have a family, meaning that you want children. So if you're a young man that just want to pursue your career, you really don't want any children, you don't care about any of that, then maybe marriage is not for you. Maybe pumping and dumping, of course, using protection is the best scenario for you. And in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that, because all women are not marriage material. Now, for the brothers that do decide to get married and they decide that marriage is right for them, they believe that they can find a suitable mate. And I do believe there's some suitable mates that are still available. Then you may want to listen to this series and you may want to understand the importance of marriage. Now, I just gave you my opinion of why marriage is important. It's only important for those who decide to have children, because children, statistically, they grow up in a 2-parent household with a father and a mother, tend to do better than children that grow up in a single parent household. That's my opinion. Now, what we're going to deal with in this video is the opinion of the state, or shall I say the opinion of our society here in America. Now, I'm going to cover what Cornell Law School is saying in their definition as far as what marriage is, but I'm also going to cover what the Supreme Court, how they define what marriage is, because I think that's hugely important, because the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land and they have the last say so, right? The last decision, the last interpretation on what law or even what words mean in our society. So what they interpret marriage to mean is what marriage means here in America. So their interpretation is hugely important. So we're going to cover how marriage is viewed in American jurisprudence in this video. So it says marriage definition. It says the legal union of a couple as spouses. The basic elements of a marriage are, number 1, the parties' legal ability to marry each other. Number 2, mutual consent of the parties. And number 3, a marriage contract as required by law. So those are the 3 basic elements of a marriage. And I'm going to say it again, because humans learn through repetition. So repetition is hugely important. So I'm going to say it again. Number 1, the parties' legal ability to marry each other. This is you being of age and you being of sound mind, right? Number 2 is the mutual consent of the parties. You agreeing and wanting to marry her, and she agreeing and wanting to marry you. And number 3 is a marriage contract, right? Or marriage license as required by law. Now, overview. It says, in the English common law tradition from which our legal doctrines and concepts have developed, a marriage was a contract based upon a voluntary private agreement by a man and a woman to become husband and wife. Marriage was viewed as the basis of the family unit and vital to the preservation of morals and civilization. You hear that? Marriage is the basis of the family unit. This is why I said, in my opinion, right, that if you want to have children, then you should be married with a suitable partner, right? And it is vital for the preservation of morals and civilization. So in order for our people, right, black people, to continue morality, or what some of us want to say proper morality, and to act civilized, to be civilized, then we should have, I'm gonna say at least half of us should be in marriages. Okay. Now it says traditionally the husband had a duty to provide a safe house, pay for necessities such as food and clothing, and live in the house. The wife's obligations were maintaining a home, living in the home, having sexual relations with her husband, and rearing the couple's children. Today, the underlying concept that marriage is a legal contract still remains. So today, being married is still a legal contract, but due to changes in society, the legal obligations are not the same. It says marriage is chiefly regulated by the states. The Supreme Court has held that states are permitted to reasonably regulate the institution by prescribing who is allowed to marry and how the marriage can be dissolved. So your states, all of our states, govern or chiefly governs or regulates marriages. Now it says enter into a marriage changes the legal status of both parties and gives both husband and wife new rights and obligations. One power that the states do not have, however, is that of prohibiting marriage in the absence of a valid reason. So it has to be a valid reason to prevent marriage. Now, a valid reason would be something like the age of consent, basically a child. You know, if a person, an adult, tries to marry a child, then of course the state will invalidate that. Or if an individual tried to marry a blood relative, like a first cousin, the state can invalidate that. Now it says, for example, in Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court held that prohibiting interracial marriage is unconstitutional because it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, thus establishing that marriage is a civil right. So interracial marriage is protected under the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause of that particular amendment. Now, it goes on and it says the majority of states limit people to one living husband or one wife at a time and will not issue marriage licenses to anyone with a living spouse. So once an individual is married, the person must be legally released from the relationship by either death, divorce, or annulment before he and she can remarry. Other limitations on individuals include age, which I just covered, and then also close relationship. And again, close relationship would be something like a blood relative. Now, I'm not going to read further. Now, you can read on yourself. I advise you to continue reading, but I'm going to move on. Now, in this particular case from the Supreme Court, now this case right here is Andrews versus Andrews, and it's from 1903. And I want to read this. This is from Justice White. And I want to read his interpretation of marriage. You know, again, I think this is very important now. He says that marriage, viewed solely as a civil relation, possesses elements of a contract. It's obvious, but it is also elementary that marriage, even considering it as only a civil contract, is so interwoven with the very fabric of society that it cannot be entered into except as authorized by law, and that it may not, when once entered into, be dissolved by the mere consent of the parties. It would be superfluous to cite the many authorities establishing these truisms, and we therefore are content to excerpt a statement of the doctrine on the subject contained in the opinion of this court delivered by Mr. Justice Fields in Maynard versus Hill, and this is from 1888. So this is what Justice Fields has said, in quote, "Marriage, as creating the most important relation in life, as having more to do with the morals and civilization of the people than any other institution, has always been subject to the control of the legislature. Now, I'm going to stop right there briefly because I think that is huge. For all my logical brothers, all my brothers that have reason, that think in reason, right? Marriage, right, is the most important relation in life. Now, I'm not saying this. This is what the Supreme Court said. This is what they said, and this is American jurisprudence. They're saying that morals and civilization of the people, right, is predicated on marriage. And it has always been subject to the control of the legislature. And the legislature, as we know, is the part of the government that enacts laws. Now, he goes on and he says that body prescribes the age at which the parties may contract to marry. In most states, it's around age 18. The duties and obligations it creates, its effects upon the property rights of both present and prospective, and the acts which may constitute grounds for its dissolution. According to our Supreme Court, the legislature have always laid out the standard for what constitutes a marriage. Then he goes on and he says, it is also to be observed that while marriage is often termed by text writers and in decisions of courts a civil contract, generally to indicate that it must be founded upon the agreement of the parties and does not require any religious ceremony for its solemnization. It is something more than a mere contract. So marriage is more than a contract. The consent of the parties is of course essential to its existence, but when the contract to marry is executed by the marriage, a relation between the parties is created which they cannot change. That's when you have sex with each other. That's sexual intercourse. Other contracts may be modified, restricted, or enlarged, or entirely released upon the consent of the parties. Not so with marriage. The relation once formed, the law steps in and holds the parties to various obligations and liabilities, which the law should, because marriage is a solemn agreement. So it's more than just a mere contract. It's the basis of human relations. It is an institution in the maintenance of which, in its purity, the public is deeply interested, for it is the foundation of the family and of society, without which there would be neither civilization nor progress. So the Supreme Court is saying that without marriage, right, there would not be family and there would be no society. Because of course, society begins with family. So it's the family unit, right? Family forms the society. Family is what creates the city. The city is what creates the county. The county creates the states, like that. And the state creates the national government. And I'm going to stop right there. But I wanted to give you all the definition of what marriage is based upon American jurisprudence. And the reason why this is important is because we all live in a society. All of us do. All of us Americans, we live in a society. And I think it's ignorant to live in a society and not understand the laws nor the interpretation of the laws on how those laws apply to you. So we all need to know what marriage is, how it's viewed, and how it is deemed to apply to all of us. So in this video, we learned that marriage preserves morality and civilization could not progress without marriage. Thank you for listening. Please drop a comment below. Peace.